Joining us now to talk about Jerry Garcia, the man in the music, from Cleveland, Ohio, Jim Henke, the curator of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Museum, and Jane Scott, rock critic for The Plain Dealer, and with us here in New York, Matt Goldberg, a self-described deadhead and managing editor of Swing Magazine. Good morning to all of you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Jim, let's start with you. We've spoken before when you were working back at Rolling Stone. You've interviewed Jerry Garcia. For people who don't know about the Grateful Dead and don't know about Jerry Garcia, tell me the importance of Jerry Garcia.
Well, I think the Dead, and Jerry in particular, really represented a lot of the values of the 60s. And I think, he really stood for freedom. I think he stood for individualism and experimentalism. And I think that was true about his life. I think it was true about his music.
You said that he is along the lines of Elvis Presley and John Lennon. Those are two pretty big names to throw in a sentence with somebody. Why do you say that?
Well, I think in terms of an icon, I think, he was very meaningful to a lot of people. There are the thousands of Deadheads. Here was a band that, even though they didn't put out that many albums, and most of the albums they put out only did sort of, medium or even poor by a lot of today's standards, they managed to tour consistently, sell 60,000 seats at a baseball stadium, and people really followed them from show to show and really believed in them. And I think it's the same kind of sort of role model, as it were, to use probably the wrong term maybe, but as Lennon or Elvis.
One thing, many people were saddened when they heard about his death. Many people were. Some people weren't surprised when they heard where he died, at a drug rehab center, because Jerry had been candid about his experimentation with drugs and the band's experimentation with drugs over the years, speaking candidly for years. Some of your thoughts on that?
Well, I think obviously Jerry did have an on and off battle with drugs. We know he'd had some health problems in the past, and as I say, I think he really stood for sort of personal freedom, and I think he really liked had been attracted to drugs, and obviously I'm not a doctor or anything, so I don't know what the ultimate cause of his death was, but I think certainly the Dead were associated with drugs over the years.
Jane, let's talk with you. You've been a rock critic since the 60s, and you have seen every rock and roll band there is to see. How many times did you see the Grateful Dead in concert?
Well, they were at the Coliseum 13 times. I missed some of them, but I tried to get to all of them. But they went a lot of places. They went to the Rubber Bowl, and they played with Bob Dylan. That was a big shot. That was a big one. We remember one of the best of all.
One thing's about Jerry Garcia, he was a gentleman, and if you went to a Grateful Dead concert, inside the arena, the gentleness of the crowd was something that was as amazing as the music.
That's true, and they were respectful. One time, Jerry did a solo, more or less, with a couple of members of the group and other people, and they just left, and no one complained. They said, well, he's so great, we don't complain. And also, there was an intermission lasted an hour. He didn't have a strict sense of go, go, go time, but that was all right, too. The people themselves are very sort of laid back, and they loved it. He had an integrity about him, they felt, and that just musically. And for instance, they would tour before their album came out. They weren't concerned that you would buy their album, and they let people. My nephews have 500 or 600 tapes that they taped at the shows themselves, and none of them alike. That's one thing. No concert was like the last one.
Jane, let me talk to Matt right here. Matt, how old are you?
I'm 25.
25 years old. Why a guy is 25? A lot of Deadheads are young. Jerry Garcia looked like your grandfather, a real nice grandfather.
I think he was just about the same age as my grandfather,
What was the appeal?
The appeal, I think, for people of my generation, in terms of the Grateful Dead, is this way to satisfy your wanderlust. Jerry himself at one point said that he thought it was like when he was young in the early 50s, when people could still get on boxcars and sort of hobo their way back and forth across the country, during the era when the Beats were coming into prominence. There's a real sense of adventure for young people back then, and I don't really see, and I don't think Jerry saw, a sense of adventure like that outside of the Grateful Dead experience for young people today. My generation, we grew up with television and music videos, safely ensconced in suburbia, and here's a way to really get out there and experience something, and there's a little unpredictability, and you're on the road, and you don't know exactly what's going to happen.
All right, well, Matt Goldberg, Jane Scott, Jim Henke, we could talk about this for many, many more minutes. Good to see you this morning. And Jim, good luck with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That'll be opening later on this month.
Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. 23 after the hour. We'll be back.
So we have spent a part of this morning celebrating the Grateful Dead's Jerry Garcia's life. And it's been so interesting to see how his fans transcended so many different generations. You see a 20-year-old kid who has followed him all over the country for the last 2 years, and then you talk to someone like Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont, who said that when he heard the news that Jerry Garcia died, it felt like someone had kicked him in the stomach.
I think John Blackstone had the line of the day when he said, not all of the Dead's fans wore tie-dye, some of them wore ties.
Yeah, yeah. Grateful Dead. Remember, there was a little hullabaloo or brouhaha about Jerry Garcia, because Ben and Jerry's, as an homage, as they say in Hollywood now, made that for him, because they're big tie-dyed guys. Jerry didn't know anything about it. And they were like, uh-oh. So I think Jerry...
But wasn't Jerry, didn't he appear in some of the ads after that?
Well,
eventually.
After they made whatever they made to get the thing...
Who'd they name Chubby Hubby after?
I don't know. We're looking for that person now.
Might be me in about 3 years.
But the taste works for me.
Oh, Chubby Hubby's
We're down
great.
about 2 pints on the air of that here one day.
Fans gathered around the country and the nation's capital as well for impromptu vigils to remember the leader of the Grateful Dead. Garcia died of an apparent heart attack at a drug and alcohol treatment center near San Francisco. His music and his lifestyle originated in San Francisco. And CNN's Greg Lefebvre attended a vigil for him there.
The Grateful Dead gave its fans a trip into the past. On news of Garcia's death, fans flocked to Golden Gate Park to play his music and remember. Country Joe McDonald played there too.
I'm getting depressed and I'm in shock over it. It's a very important end to something.
Yeah, Jerry was found dead this morning in his room.
Radio stations in Garcia's hometown played his music and consoled listeners, many of whom were grief-stricken by Garcia's passing.
I went through this in 1986 when Jerry went into his diabetic coma, and I was on the air at the time, and I found out that people needed a shoulder and a hand to hold. They had to review memories and talk about shows.
In the Haight-Ashbury district, where Garcia started, others gathered.
All his songs, everything was so positive.
Music is about how you can take a room full of people and turn them into one big spirit.
Counselors from a nearby crisis center worked the crowd quietly.
I urge all deadheads to grieve privately and with some style and some dignity in the way that Jerry would have wanted.
Fans went online, on the internet, on CompuServe. Fans on America Online displayed the icons for tears and hugs. Long an accomplished painter, Garcia opened a show of his own works. It came just a year after he was hospitalized for exhaustion.
A lot of effort to get healthy. Nothing like the threat of death to kind of get your attention.
Garcia's music mixed bluegrass, folk, rock, and country. He stayed true to the original themes throughout 3 decades of music.
Our generation has grown up to appreciate that rock and roll has changed with us, has moved with the times, and so there is still room for us for rock and roll. And the Grateful Dead is exemplary of that kind of a band that had always been beyond rock and roll, beyond faddism, beyond fashion.
Will the band continue to play? Their colleagues believe so, citing the band's anthem, I Will Survive. Greg Lefebvre, CNN, San Francisco.
He's such a loss, man. I don't know how to tell you. If I had to pick one guy to stand up for all musicians and argue our case, okay, let's say in the great court in the sky somewhere, the galactic court, you know, it would be Jerry.